Perfect. Well, I've been really excited for this event. It's going to be a workshop based on writing and proposing your own legislation, and we're joined by Esther, who is one of the co-founders of What We All Deserve and one of the key proponents of SB 260, which was a menstrual equity bill in California. And so, again, really excited to hear what she has to say and for everyone to get involved in their own realms of policy. So with that, I'll let Esther take over.
Perfect. Thank you, Harry. I'm going to share my screen. Uh, can everyone see my screen? Okay, perfect. So yeah, welcome to a legislation writing workshop. My name is Esther, and I am currently a first year at Barnard College in New York, and I'm majoring in poli-sci and urban studies. And I'm also one of the co-founders of What We All Deserve, which is a youth-led organization dedicated to advocating for economic justice issues and anti-poverty work. And we mainly do that through legislative advocacy and also grassroots organizing. My colleague Fiona is unfortunately very sick right now, so she can't make it, but she is with us in spirit. And as Harry mentioned, Fiona and I wrote SB 260 this past year, which is the Menstrual Equity Act of 2023, and it was a California bill that would add $20 per month to CalWORKs recipients' monthly cash aid. And like I said, that's what SB 260 is. And then in the process of advocating for SB 260, we got the support of 12 legislative co-authors, 13 organizational co-sponsors, and over 60 supporting organizations through our coalition, which is called the Unperiod Poverty California Coalition. And we had some like pretty big organizations be a part of this, like ACLU, NARAL, Planned Parenthood Action Committee. So it was really like a pretty big coalition building effort. And SB 260 is going to be kind of like the model of what I'm going to like go over today. So I'll kind of give like different steps of how you can write your own bill and reference SB 260 throughout. But I really want this to be like a workshop for all of you. So there'll be questions throughout this presentation. And like some of them you could feel free to like drop your answers in this chat, but also like jot your answers down somewhere. Because I think if you want to write a bill, like this will be a really helpful place for you to get started. But yeah, there's going to be sorted into like 6 steps. So there's like brainstorming, research, finding out who the stakeholders are, and then pitching your bill to legislators and organizations, and then the advocacy part of it. And also throughout this presentation, if any of you have any questions, like feel free to raise your hand. And I really want to like be a resource for you all. Yeah, let's get started. So first, I want you all to go on Google if you don't know already, and just find out like when your state legislative session is, and then drop it in the chat. So like an example answer would be like yearly, like January to June. And the reason why this is important is because you're going to like model the rest of this process like based on when your leg session is. And then there's like little time like markers on the presentation that'll tell you like what you should be doing and like when. So like you should be doing blank like 3 months before. So yeah. Okay, January to early spring. Great. Okay, amazing. Yeah, California. We love California. Okay, perfect. This is great. Okay, so the first part we're going to talk about is brainstorming and research. And you want to start doing this ideally 2 to 3 months before, but there really isn't like a time that's too early. You can always be like more prepared. So some questions for you while you want to be brainstorming and doing research. First is like kind of figuring out what policy area you're interested in. So if this is like healthcare or welfare programs or menstrual equity, and really think about how like your own lived experiences are have been affected by policy or like can be affected by policy, because I think that's a really great place to start when you're brainstorming. And then you can also think about like some issues in your local community that can be fixed through policy. That might be like a little bit harder depending on like where you live, but that's something you can think about too. And then something else, like once you kind of have the area of policy you want to work on, that is really helpful is looking at other states' bills, and like seeing kind of getting inspiration from that. So for example, with SB 260, Fiona and I wanted to focus on menstrual equity policy through welfare because like we are both students from low-income families, and her family in particular had a lot of experience with like the federal welfare program SNAP. So that's kind of where we first started. And then we found an Illinois bill from 2021 that like expanded SNAP to include menstrual products. So that's like where we got the idea from. And then originally you wanted to just like kind of copy that over to California. But things kind of changed and I'll talk about that later on. But something else we also did was getting bill language from like organizations. So we got like a language draft from the ACLU of Northern California, and they actually tried to pitch our current bill before in like 2020, I believe. But it just didn't get picked up. So that's another resource that you can use. So this top part here is what I mentioned before, like the bill in Illinois, and then sample language that we got from the ACLU that we kind of just referenced off of when writing our own bill. So a question for you is, what's a potential policy area you'd advocate in? And again, feel free to drop this in the chat. I'd love to hear all of your ideas. Oh yeah, the California bill making school start later was really interesting. And I also got like very recently implemented, I think in my senior year of high school. Um, yeah, those are all very important. Amazing. Sue, I love your idea. Okay, great. So the next thing we're going to talk about is identifying stakeholders. And this comes like at the same time or a little bit after your research. So looking for legislators in your state that have been really vocal about your issue or have already authored bills surrounding your issue is really helpful. Something that personally helped me was just like looking at your state legislators' websites and like typing in the keywords. So for me, that was for SB 260, that was like menstrual equity or like period products or whatever that might be for you. And something else is like what organizations specialize in working around your area, because they'll usually like have a section of their website that's like policy, and then you can see you can also find out the legislators that are stakeholders in your issue area by going to organizations. And yeah, again, like a quick Google search will do. I think research really snowballs in this situation where you can find like an organization and then find the organization's other partner organizations, and it just like branches out from there. And then for SB 260, for example, we made like a super extensive spreadsheet that was like color coded and everything. You don't need to do this, but this is just what worked for us. But the top part here was for legislators. So we kind of like kept track of who their staff contacts were, whether or not we scheduled a meeting with them, what their support status is. And then we did the same thing for organizations. And like having this kind of central like spreadsheet as a base for all of your contacts is really helpful. And I definitely encourage that. So another question for you is, off the top of your head, who are some legislators or organizations you could work with either in your area or more generally in the policy issue area that you want to focus on? And if you can't think of any right now, that's totally okay. Yeah, Harry, the three you put are definitely very active. Also like obviously HSDA. Yeah. GenUp is also a really good one. They've been like a very prominent like powerhouse in producing youth author bills. And yes, definitely your local representatives. If you are able to, I think it's always good. Like we're going to talk about this in bill pitching later, but you can always like literally walk into like your local representative's office and say like, hey, like I'm one of your constituents. And like here's an idea I have. And they really value that. Okay. So speaking of that, we're going to talk about pitching to legislators. This happens like 1 to 2 months before leg session starts, and this will be probably like the busiest time of this whole process just because you're kind of engaging in so many meetings at the same time. But the first step to that is like finding staffer emails and reaching out to people on your list that you compiled before while researching stakeholders. And then I'm not sure if this like applies to every state, but usually there is like some like spreadsheet that exists out there with all the staff contacts of people in like your state house. And like if you are in California and you don't have the spreadsheet, let me know and I can send it to you. But I unfortunately don't have it for other states. But I'm sure like it exists somewhere. And then something else that's helpful is creating a leave behind sheet and like sample bill language that you can like reference during meetings and also send to staffers after so they have like a refresher of what you talked about. So what you see on the right here is like our leave behind sheet for SB 260. And then another thing that's really important is knowing that finding an author is kind of like a mutual matching process because you might have multiple legislators who want to pick up your bill. And then when you're like when you're in that situation, it's really important to like pick the right person. So some things you want to consider are like what their policy specialties are and what they have experience writing policy for. Their seniority, because that really matters, especially when it comes to bills getting heard. But I think the most important thing of all is like committees. So for example, SB 260, Senator Menjivar, who's the author, was the chair of like a budget subcommittee, and that happened to be the one that SB 260 was passing through. So we had like a really easy time getting through that committee, whereas other bills might have had a much harder time. And it's really just a lot of like internal politics within the House that you have to figure out. So like definitely I recommend like doing thorough research on that when you have to pick people. And then the next is pitching to organizations. So this happens like after you secure an author, but it really never ends because you're always trying to like get more support, as much support as you can. But some tips I have are just trying to gauge like key organization support for your bill and also getting feedback. And keep in mind that like during this whole process, your bill can change, and I'll talk about how our will change later. But again, like I really recommend keeping a spreadsheet like that indicates if you emailed them yet, if they're interested, like whether or not you've met with them, if they're supportive or not, and also if they want to join your coalition. And then as far as like SB 260 goes, during this process, we pitched to like over 40 organizations, I think. And one of them was California Food Banks. And they actually, when we originally pitched it, the bill was going to be implemented through SNAP. And they actually threatened to like basically sink our bill if we continued to do it through SNAP because it would have been counterintuitive to the work that like their hunger activists have been doing for so long. So we kind of like talked more like with them and learned more about like why they said that. And then through like understanding that feedback, we changed our implementation from CalFresh, which is SNAP, to CalWorks. And like while we were doing these changes, it's really important that we maintained consistent communication with the senator's office. So that's something else that is good to keep in mind. But yeah, before we get into coalition building, I know that was a lot of information. So does anyone have any questions so far? Okay, perfect. I'll keep going then. But yeah, again, coalition building is after you find an author and it never ends. But something that is good to start with is just determining the structure of your coalition. and like what types of support you need from organizations. So having a very clear ask, and then also like how you want to organize like the membership. So do you want to have like co-sponsors versus members? And then co-sponsors would have like a larger time commitment versus members who like probably just help call in and send letters of support, etc. Um, and then like determine regular meeting times for each group. So for co-sponsors, maybe you want to meet like bi-weekly, but then for members, you meet monthly. Or like co-sponsors meet like weekly, members bi-weekly. It's really up to you. And also it kind of ebbs and flows based on where you are in this whole process. And then also developing coalition branding, like logos, social media. I think that's a really good way to increase engagement and build support. So like on the right here is our like End Period Poverty California logo. And then another thing that is really helpful is asking current coalition members to connect you to more orgs outside. So that way you like kind of have a consistent growth of your supporter base. And then more specifically about like our own coalition, like I said before, we had 13 co-sponsors and over 60 members. And then we kind of had like the co-sponsors meet bi-weekly, members monthly, but we kept a very like consistent email update system where if we had anything, we'd like notify them right away. And that's also really important in helping like your coalition members feel like they're like engaging in the work and that they like provide value to the coalition. And also asking partners to like promote our Instagram and Twitter things. If you go on our Twitter, you'll see like basically all of our likes and retweets are like from our coalition partners. And that's because we like asked them to do that. And I think it also really helps amplify the movement. So and then next, just like a very brief overview of the legislative process. This is just how it works in California. I'm sure it like might be a little bit different in other states. But it's pretty standard in that like it goes through one side of the legislative system and then the other like Senate Assembly or vice versa. And then throughout the process, there are like different committees. The bill is read on the floor multiple times. It's voted on by different people. And then at the very end, if it passes like the budget system, if it has fiscal impact, then it gets signed by the governor. So, and there's like a bunch of stop signs around because there are a lot of places where your bill can die, which is like the hard thing about about the legislative process. But yeah, that's what comes with it, I guess. So yeah, in terms of the legislative session, my bad. There are a few like key points. First is testifying at the Capitol during the hearings that I just mentioned. And something you want to be really intentional with is like finding witnesses for this. If your sessions allow like witnesses to be there. Something that we did was we flew out a CalWORK student parent to testify, and that was really powerful because she was someone who was personally impacted or who would be personally impacted by this bill. And then she was able to like share her story and share like the specifics of how she'd be impacted. And like obviously that requires like funding, which we're really lucky to receive from our organizations, but that's something else to keep in mind. And also like preparing for opposition. We didn't really have this for SB 260, but some bills like get pretty intense opposition. So like knowing how to deal with that. And like that's something that you can talk about with your author's office. And then another thing is like mobilizing your coalition for call-ins and other forms of advocacy. So like on the right here, you'll see the spreadsheet, and that's kind of what we use to like ask people to call in for us. And in California, how it works is people don't have to be there to like say a me too for the bill, and they can just like do a phone call and then it records them officially as a supporter of the bill. So that's something that you can use. And then in terms of other advocacy, there's press and social media, which I'll go over right now. So first testimonies, in the middle here is Giovanna, who is a student parent we flew out. And this is just like another example of how we use our social media to amplify like the work we were doing. And then for press, something that's really helpful is finding like newspapers or like just news outlets that have published articles about your issue or just generally about like legislative advocacy. So in California, like one really big one is Cal Matters, and they're based out of Sacramento, which is the capital. And Fiona and I got to write an op-ed for them, which is really cool. And then this thing on the right is just from the senator's website. But I think the press is like a huge, very like overlooked form of work amplification, especially like in the youth organizing sphere. But I really encourage you all to like make the most of it and try to contact like as many people as you can. And usually you won't hear back from them, but like when you do, it like really helps a lot. But yeah, that's all I had for the presentation. But just really quickly about What We All Deserve, which is the organization that Fiona and I are co-founders of. We are, like I said, a youth-led organization that fights for basic needs and economic justice through legislative advocacy and grassroots organizing. So I know a couple of you mentioned you want to work in like anti-poverty legislative advocacy, so this might be something you're interested in. And we have like student teams for a lot of different roles, from policy, operations, social media, partnerships, and finance. So really like anything you might be interested in working on, we'd love for you to join. And if you are interested in joining, please feel free to email us. Our emails are on the next slide. But yeah, thank you so much for being here today. The rest of this workshop is going to be like a time for you all to kind of like ask individual questions if you have any, and like I want to be here as a resource to kind of help you like workshop through your ideas. So yeah, thank you so much again. Yeah, Elmedin, sorry, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah, it's Elmedine, but I have one question.
Yeah.
Uh, could this whole thing also work for like your local government, like city government or county government?
Yeah, I think it definitely could. I think the legislative process might be a little bit different compared to a state legislative system, but I think the whole thing of like pitching, brainstorming your idea, trying to figure out who the stakeholders are and pitching that definitely is the same. Yeah. Any other questions?
I'm just wondering, is the was the earlier part of the event or the slideshow, will it be like released for like public viewing? Just because I need to run right now, and I'd like to look over it later.
Yeah, this is being recorded. And I'm sure they'll distribute it to you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, if that's it for tonight, then thank you all so much for coming. And feel free to email me. I'll drop my email in the chat. Second. But yeah, there's my email. If you have any questions about like writing your own bill or really anything, shoot me an email and I'll try to answer as best as I can. But yeah, thank you so much again and have a great rest of your night.
Thank you so much, Esther. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure a lot of people will watch this recording at home as well if they couldn't make it. But yeah, super
Thank you,
informative. And
Harry.
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
All right, perfect.